In the distant kingdom of Azula, surrounded by mysterious forests and shimmering rivers, King Kofi stood on the verge of a decision that could forever alter the fate of his lineage. Azula, though peaceful and prosperous, carried a curse that spanned generations. Kofi, a worthy monarch yet burdened by the urgency of the situation, faced a deep and intimate dilemma. To ensure that his future heir would be a man, someone capable of inheriting the crown and continuing the royal bloodline, he needed to fulfill an ancient tradition. There was a secret hidden within his own bloodline, a mystery that no one had ever solved. The middle name of his grandfather, the former King Olamide. This name, lost in the mists of time, held the power to unleash a spell strong enough to ensure that his son would be a man, regardless of what fate might try to preordain. Without this spell, any heir would be destined to be a woman, breaking the succession cycle and threatening Azula's stability. Desperate, Kofi summoned all the sages, sorcerers, and scholars of the kingdom. He announced, in a firm voice, a grand reward for anyone who could unravel the secret of his grandfather's middle name. The reward would not be mere gold or land, but also power and influence within the kingdom. The future of Azula depended on it. Without a male heir, the royal dynasty would come to an end. In his proclamation, the king described the reward. He who discovers the middle name of Olamide, the ancient king, will hold the power to secure the continuation of our royal dynasty. This name is the spell that can guarantee a male heir and a prosperous future for our kingdom. The people stirred, the news quickly spreading across villages and neighboring cities. Everyone wanted to partake in the quest, not only for the reward, but for the chance to shape the very fate of the kingdom. Sorcerers and mystics from distant lands arrived, bringing their grimoires and promises of magical solutions. However, for Kofi, this was not merely a search for a name. He knew that the key to saving his kingdom lay in something deeper, something that could not be attained by magic or intellect alone. In the village at the foot of Azula's hills, a young orphan named Zola watched everything with keen interest. Raised by her aunt Adana, Zola had always been fascinated by the kingdom's history, the power of kings, and the magic that permeated the lands around them. She knew she had a unique spark within her, something that set her apart from the others. Her dream wasn't just to be another simple peasant, but to achieve something great, something that would lift her from obscurity and put her in a position where she could shape her own destiny. However, her life with Adana was never easy. Her aunt, an intelligent yet selfish woman with a hardened heart, feared that Zola might one day surpass her. She felt a subtle but persistent jealousy toward her niece's youth and energy, worried that Zola might achieve something Adana could never. And what troubled her most was that Zola was a young woman full of potential, something that could be revealed if given the chance. When the news of the king's challenge reached them, Adana immediately saw an opportunity. She knew that Zola, with her natural intelligence and curiosity, could be a serious contender in the search for Olamide's secret name. Adana couldn't allow that to happen. So, with a devious and dark plan, she used an ancient dark magic she possessed, a forbidden magic few dared to practice. On a moonless night, she cast the spell, turning Zola into a serpent, a creature unable to take part in the challenge. Zola, who had dreamed of a grand future, saw her life change in an instant as her body covered in silver scales and her eyes became piercing yet inhuman. Exiled in the forbidden forest, a place few creatures dared to tread, Zola was left to her own devices. But despite her cruel form, the young woman still retained her sharp mind, her determination, and, above all, her hope. She knew that, somehow, her life still had a purpose. Adana's spell had imprisoned her physically, but it had not captured her soul. As Zola faced the dangers of the forest, King Kofi dealt with his own dilemmas. None of the sages had been able to solve the riddle of his middle name. Weeks passed, and the shadow of uncertainty grew heavier over Azula. Time was running out, and Kofi knew that if he didn't find a solution soon, the future of his kingdom and his lineage would be at risk. And perhaps, just perhaps, the answer was closer than he thought. While King Kofi struggled to keep his kingdom intact, the young Zola, now transformed into a serpent, wandered through the forbidden forest, a place of shadows and mystery. The magic that had imprisoned her was powerful, but it couldn't crush the flame of hope that still burned inside her. Zola still believed she could change her fate, that one day she would reverse the spell that had turned her into a snake and achieve the grand future she had always dreamed of. Though the transformation was cruel and painful, Zola was not just a victim of her aunt's betrayal. Her mind, though trapped in a body that was not her own, remained intact. She knew that Adana, with her ambition and envy, had cast her away from the world and her dreams. But that wouldn't paralyze her. On the contrary, her imprisonment in the forest gave her an unexpected clarity, a sharp vision of what truly mattered. She didn't just want to reverse the spell, she wanted to prove to everyone, especially her aunt, that she had a greater purpose. In the world, the days that passed were filled with solitude and challenges. Zola encountered creatures that inhabited the depths of the forest, some dangerous, others surprisingly friendly. She was guided by an invisible force, something that felt more than mere instinct. Every step she took in the darkness of the forest brought her closer to a truth that was yet to come. Even in her serpent form, Zola felt she was being led to something greater. Something that, in some way, was tied to Azula's future and the curse threatening the kingdom. In Azula, chaos was beginning to settle. King Kofi's announcement of the reward for discovering Alamide's middle name drew more and more people to the palace. Sorcerers, sages, adventurers, and even curious individuals with promises of power and wealth gathered in the kingdom's streets and squares. The hope of finding the solution to the spell and ensuring a male heir was in the hands of anyone who had the luck or skill to uncover the lost name's secret. Meanwhile, Adana, who was well aware of the growing agitation in Azula, found herself increasingly restless. The ambition in her heart, always nurtured by the idea of control and power, had driven her to a point of no return. She knew that if Zola could recover from the curse and take part in the search for the king's name, she could be the key to changing the balance of power in the village and perhaps even the kingdom. And Adana was unwilling to let that happen, confident in her belief that her control over Zola's fate was unbreakable. Adana began to act more fervently. She sought out allies in the darkest corners of Azula, looking for forbidden magic and spells that could ensure the young woman would never break free from the spell that held her. The old witch who lived at the edge of the forbidden forest became her first ally. This witch, known for her skills in powerful enchantments, suggested that to ensure Zola's complete submission, Adana should cast something even tracking spell that would prevent Zola from escaping the forest and keep her under control. "You know what needs to be done," said the witch, her voice raspy, her hands trembling as she held a dusty grip. "With this magic, Zola will be permanently bound to you. Even if she tries to escape, her essence will always be yours." Adana, in her relentless desire for control, did not hesitate. With the witch by her side, she cast the final spell, a darker magic that would seal Zola in the forest forever. A spell that would bind the young woman's body and soul to the very magic that had turned her into a serpent. Now it would not only be Zola's form that imprisoned her, she would be eternally connected to the force Adana had invoked. No longer escape. Meanwhile, Zola, who already felt the pressure of the spell on her mind and body, sensed a new weight, something heavier, more restrictive. She realized that with every movement, every attempt to find an exit, something invisible was pulling her back. Adana had not only exiled her, but now, with her magic, she was trying to suffocate any hope of escape or transformation. But Zola was not willing to surrender. Something inside her told her there was a greater force at play, a force that went beyond her aunt's cruelty. Zola knew that Adana's spell was not the end, it was merely the beginning of her journey. She might be a serpent, but her soul, her essence, was still free, and nothing could imprison her forever. Meanwhile, in the palace, King Kofi began to realize that things were not as simple as he had imagined. None of the sorcerers had managed to uncover the secret of his grandfather's name. Time was running out, and he felt that some hidden force was pulling the strings of his kingdom's fate in ways he couldn't understand. With every step, every move, the king sensed that the solution to his problem might be closer than he thought to hand, perhaps. To solve the riddle, he needed to look beyond the borders of his kingdom, to where magic and betrayal intertwine, and so Zola, in her serpent form, and Kofi, in his desperate search for answers, were drawing closer without even knowing it. Their destinies were intertwined in ways that even the king could not foresee, and the future of Azuland, perhaps that world, would depend on the choices they made from that moment onward. Time was running out, and King Kofi knew his patience was wearing thin. The riddle of his middle name remained an unsolved mystery. Despite all his intellect and wisdom, no one seemed able to unlock the key to the spell that would ensure the birth of a male heir, as foretold by the ancient prophecy of his lineage. Tension in the kingdom grew, and the weight of his fate seemed to increase with each passing day. The desperate search for answers led Kofi to make a drastic decision. He could no longer rely on others. He needed to act alone, even if it meant facing unknown dangers. It was the only way to save his kingdom and fulfill the promise of an heir. Thus he announced a bold and perilous journey, the quest for the magic egg, a legendary artifact hidden deep within the forbidden forest, which, according to the elders, had the power to reveal the lost secret of his name. The Forbidden Forest was a place feared and misunderstood by all, mentioned in ancient legends. It was a land shrouded in mystery, where even the winds seemed to whisper secrets of ages past. Many brave adventurers had attempted to explore its depths, but few returned, and those who did were rarely the same. It was said that anyone who ventured too far into the forest would lose not only their way, but their sanity as well. No man or woman had ever managed to leave that enigmatic place unscathed. With his mind set on his mission, the king knew he could not turn back. The magic of the magic egg might be the only solution to the spell that haunted his lineage. He needed it to ensure the continuation of his dynasty. Furthermore, the spell his grandmother had cast before her death, guaranteeing that Kofi's first heir would be male, could not be ignored. The kingdom needed a prince to maintain the balance of magical forces and ensure Azula's prosperity. Before leaving, Kofi paid one final visit to the graves of his parents, who rested side by side, immortalized by a gray marble tombstone. The morning sun softly bathed the hills, and the air was heavy with a silent melancholy. The king, kneeling before the tombs, murmured words of respect and longing, but also of determination. He knew the ghosts of his ancestors were watching over him. In silence, Kofi vowed not to fail. It was at that moment that the chief priest of the kingdom appeared, bringing with him two magical items that he knew were necessary for Kofi's journey. The priest, a tall and thin man with deep, mysterious green eyes, handed the king an indestructible sword forged by the finest blacksmiths of the ancient lands. The sword had a subtle glow and a pulsating energy, as though it were alive, ready to defend its bearer. In addition, the priest gave Kofi a golden bracelet, studded with gemstones that seemed to glow with an inner light. According to the priest, the bracelet had the power to grant wisdom in critical moments, allowing the wearer to discern truth from all that was deceptive. "Use these items wisely, my king," said the priest in a deep voice. "The sword cannot be broken, and the bracelet will guide your heart. You will need both to face what lies ahead." Kofi looked at the items with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. He knew his mission was risky, but the reward, the secret of his name, and the promise of an heir justified any sacrifice. With the sword in one hand and the bracelet in the other, he gave one last gesture of respect to the graves of his parents, before turning and setting off for the forest, his solitary journey just beginning. The entrance to the forbidden forest was a clear boundary, where the known world turned murky and dark. The trees there were immense, their roots intertwined as if trying to trap intruders. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind was muffled, and the sunlight, filtering through the treetops, seemed to emanate an eerie and distant aura. As Kofi ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of unease grew. Every step seemed to echo in the profound silence of the place. The vegetation was thick, and the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air. He felt the weight of the forest, as if it were alive, watching him with its invisible eyes, but there was no time to hesitate. He had to press on. In the first few days, the king encountered a series of challenges, creatures that seemed to emerge from the shadows, natural traps, and ancient enchantments that tested his courage and endurance. However, the indestructible sword and the bracelet of wisdom helped him overcome each obstacle. When he was on the brink of exhaustion, the bracelet pulsed with a soft light, and his mind cleared, showing him hidden paths. The sword cut through anything that stood in his way, and Kofi began to trust the two magical items more than anything he had learned during his reign. But deep down, he knew these items would not be enough for what lay ahead. Something more awaited at the heart of the forest, something that could not be defeated with strength or wisdom alone. It was the true test, the test of his spirit and determination. As he pressed on, the winds began to change. A sense of foreboding filled the air, and the forest seemed to close in around him. He did not know what awaited him, but he was determined to move forward. The secret of his name lay ahead, and he would not stop until he found it. The forbidden forest seemed to grow even more impenetrable as the days passed. Kofi felt as though the place was swallowing him whole. Thick air, deep shadows, and strange sounds that seemed to emerge from all directions. But he couldn't afford to stop. The mission was clear. Find the magic egg, the artifact said to hold the power to reveal his middle name and ensure the spell that would guarantee a male heir. The fate of Azula depended on it. As the king moved cautiously, the environment around him seemed to change, as if the forest were alive, reacting to his presence. Every tree, every rock, appeared to be watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The sensation of being followed was almost tangible. Even with the magical items he possessed, fatigue began to weigh on him. The bracelet glowed, almost as if it knew of his internal struggle, offering him a glimpse of renewed strength. But the truth was that the journey was becoming harder with each step. Then, in a moment of distraction, Kofi tripped over a fallen tree trunk and was thrown to the ground, the sword slipping from his hand. As he stood up, ready to continue, he heard something. A faint, almost imperceptible hissing sound. He looked around, but saw nothing. That's when, in a quick motion, a figure approached his leg, wrapping itself around his ankle with remarkable skill. It was a snake. Kofi jumped back, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword's hilt, but the serpent remained calm, its eyes glowing with an intelligence the king couldn't comprehend. This creature wasn't like any snake he knew. Its eyes were not those of a mere beast, but of a being with consciousness. Something was wrong, yet, at the same time, something felt strangely right. Kofi watched the snake warily. It wasn't trying to attack, but its presence was unsettling, almost hypnotic. The serpent's eyes glowed briefly, and Kofi felt as though he were being read, as if the creature were trying to decipher the deepest secrets of his soul. Her gaze held him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through any defense he might raise. Something stirred within Kofi. He knew there was more to this creature than just a simple snake. It was then that he noticed a crucial detail. The snake had something peculiar, something not seen in others. A thin line of gold glimmered around its tail, and its body, though a serpent, seemed to bear patterns resembling the ancient symbols he had seen in the sacred caves of Azula. It was as if the snake had been marked by something far greater, something older than he could understand. Kofi kneeled, lowering himself to take a closer look, still skeptical. Who are you? He whispered, more to himself than to the creature. To his surprise, it wasn't just the sound of his voice filling the air. A response seemed to come from within his mind, a strange and enigmatic sensation. I am Zola. The response echoed in his thoughts, like a whispering voice from somewhere distant. Kofi felt a chill run up his spine. He knew, deep down, that this snake was no ordinary creature. It had consciousness, intelligence, and perhaps even a purpose. Zola, the snake, seemed to understand what Kofi was thinking. She uncoiled herself from his leg and slowly moved away, slithering with the grace of a dancer. The king, now silent, watched intently. It was as though she were inviting him to follow. It was a strange sensation, but Kofi knew she had something to show him, something important. After a few minutes of silence, the serpent turned to him once more. With a quick and fluid motion, Zola began to move away, as if she knew exactly where to go. Kofi hesitated for a moment. He didn't have time for distractions, but something within him told him this snake wasn't just another obstacle to overcome. She was somehow connected to the mystery of the forbidden forest, perhaps even to the very magic egg he sought. It was as if the creature knew something he didn't yet understand. Without further hesitation, Kofi stood up and began to follow the snake. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew that his path was now somehow intertwined with hers. As they moved further away from the familiar trail, the forest around them seemed to close in, the sounds of distant magical creatures fading, the branches of the trees growing denser, and the daylight beginning to grow dim, filtered through the canopies above. And then, as they walked in silence, with Zola leading the way, an indescribable feeling overtook Kofi. He felt that something big was about to happen, something beyond his understanding. Perhaps this encounter with the snake wasn't just a coincidence. Perhaps it was destiny. In that moment, something was triggered within him, like a spark igniting deep within his soul. The shadows around them grew darker, but somehow he felt no fear. He felt connected to this place, connected to this serpent, and, in that immense silence, the stars in the sky seemed to shine a little brighter. And Kofi's and Zola's destinies were sealed at that very moment. The journey of both, once seemingly meaningless, was now intertwined. What had seemed like just a magical snake was slowly becoming a powerful ally in the mission Kofi was facing. The wind howled fiercely, causing the towering trees of the forbidden forest to creak and sway as though they were communicating with each other. The air was thick, laden with magic and mystery, and every step King Kofi took felt heavier than. The last Zola, the enchanted serpent, slithered silently ahead of him, but the king knew she was no ordinary snake. She was bound to something far greater, something he didn't yet fully understand. Kofi felt the weight of the mission on his shoulders. The spell he needed to perform depended on the magical egg hidden deep within the forest. However, his journey had become far more difficult than he had imagined. Not only were there the natural dangers of the forest, but also the betrayals being woven against him. The dark magic Adana had used against Zola still lingered in the air, and now, with Zola by his side, Kofi knew that the enemy was closer than ever. As they walked among the trees, Zola began to act differently. Her movements, once calm and fluid, were now more tense, as if she sensed something Kofi couldn't identify. She seemed to move with more caution, her eyes scanning the surroundings with almost obsessive attention. Kofi didn't know what was happening, but there was something off about the air. Suddenly, An explosion of light formed before them, a barrier of magical energy that appeared out of nowhere, blocking their path. Kofi reached for his sword, ready to face whatever came, but Zola was quicker. She coiled around his leg and hissed softly, but firmly, as though urging him not to make any rash moves. The light before them dissipated quickly, revealing a mysterious figure, the high priest of the kingdom, the one Kofi had believed to be his ally, but who now seemed more like a threat. The man was cloaked in dark robes, his expression grim, almost inhuman. He had been bribed by Adana, and Kofi realized that his mission was being sabotaged from within. But the priest was not there for a simple confrontation. He brought with him dark magic, a force that Kofi could already feel creeping through his body. "You shouldn't be here, Kofi." The high priest's voice echoed through the trees. "The fate of your kingdom is already sealed. What you seek will only bring more chaos." Before Kofi could react, the serpent moved with surprising speed, coiling around the priest with remarkable force. But instead of attacking, Zola did something unexpected. She writhed violently, and, as if connected to the forest's magical energy, began emitting a soft yet intense light. Kofi stood frozen, watching in awe. Something strange was happening. The moment Zola touched the high priest, an ancient spell was activated, more powerful than any magic Kofi had ever encountered. The light emanating from Zola seemed to penetrate the priest's body, and Kofi felt a surge of energy flowing between him and the snake. Something impossible was happening, something he couldn't control. Zola, even in her animal form, was being touched by an ancient magic, a magic that inexplicably bound her to a deeper, primal essence. The spell was connecting her to him in a way he had never imagined. With a muffled cry, Zola released the high priest, and the light around them vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The priest, now pale and trembling, retreated as if struck by something beyond his control. Kofi, now perplexed, looked at the snake. She was still, but there was something different in her gaze, and in that moment, he felt a shift. The magic had touched Zola in an unexpected way. It was as if her energy had intertwined with his, creating an unbreakable bond. Something more had formed between them, something Kofi couldn't fully comprehend. In the days that followed, Zola seemed weaker, but at the same time there was a renewed strength within her. She began to behave differently, more attuned to the forest's nature, and for reasons Kofi couldn't explain, she started to avoid him when he tried to touch her. Something was happening inside her, something he couldn't foresee. And then, in the stillness of the night, the truth came to light. Zola was pregnant. The connection between the king and the serpent, forged by the ancient spell, had been deeper than Kofi ever imagined. She carried life within her, a life that wasn't human, but somehow was bound to him. The destiny that had seemed uncertain and cruel now took on an unexpected form. Kofi felt a wave of surprise mixed with a sense of duty. The child he had longed for was in gestation, but in a mysterious and magical way, within a creature that was not human. Pregnancy, though unusual and inexplicable, brought a new weight to the king's journey. He knew that his quest was far from over, and that somehow this child, born of ancient and unknown magic, would be the key to the future of the kingdom. As the serpent carried the child Kofi had hoped for, the king prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. He knew he couldn't afford to fail. Azula depended on him and on the child growing under the mantle of magic that the king still barely understood. The forest grew denser as Kofi and Zola pressed forward, as if the very air was thickening with magic. The towering trees seemed to close in around them, creating a natural maze of shadows and silence. Every step the king took was cautious, his eyes alert to any movement, while Zola, now weighed down by her pregnancy, moved more slowly beside him. But with an unwavering determination, the time had come. They were close. Kofi could feel it. The magical egg, the key to completing the spell, was hidden deep within the forest, protected by an ancient force, a power that, according to legend, could alter the fate of Azula forever. But, as with all great stories, the path to the goal was always marked by obstacles. And this one would be the hardest Kofi had yet to face. Nightfall was approaching, and the sky, now dark, seemed to wrap the earth in its blanket of stars. Kofi could sense that something was about to happen. They were too close. The ground beneath their feet had become firmer and rockier, and the sound of the wind in the trees now felt more ominous, like a warning. Zola, more alert than ever, suddenly stopped. Her body tensed, and she stared ahead at the horizon, where the darkness melded with the forest's twilight. "Something is wrong," she hissed, her voice an eerie and unexpected echo for a creature like her. Kofi glanced ahead and saw a shadowy figure in the center of the clearing, tall, imposing, and silent. It was a guardian, an entity created to protect. The magical egg, its form was indistinct, like a shadow that moved with supernatural agility. There were no human traits, just the presence of pure darkness. Its face, or what seemed to be a face, was shrouded by a dark hood, and from its hands hung chains of energy pulsing with amber light. The dark guardian made no move, but it seemed to be waiting, observing them with an intensity Kofi could feel in his bones. Who dares attempt to take the egg? Its voice was like a low growl, echoing through the forest. The king did not hesitate. He knew this battle was inevitable, and he was prepared for it. With a swift motion, he drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. The magical sword, forged with the power of the ancients, was ready to face any force. Zola, even in her serpent form, stood beside him, her eyes burning with a fierceness Kofi had never imagined in her. "I am Kofi, King of Azula," the monarch declared firmly, "and I will not allow anything to stand between my kingdom and the future it deserves." The dark guardian did not respond immediately. Instead, it raised its hands, causing the ground beneath them to stir. Large roots emerged from the soil, as though the forest itself were rebelling against the intruders. Kofi stepped forward, feeling the power of the sword surge through his hands. He swung the blade, slicing through the roots with impressive precision. But the real battle was only beginning. With a roar of pure rage, the dark guardian unleashed a wave of black energy, which rapidly spread toward the king. The force of the magic seemed capable of consuming everything in its path, swallowing light and air. Kofi tried to dodge, but the energy was faster, more intense than he had imagined. He felt the impact of the magic like a cold, crushing wave, forcing him to fall to his knees. Zola, however, did not hesitate. She launched herself forward, swiftly slithering between Kofi's legs and attacking the guardian with unexpected fury. Her form, though limited as a serpent, moved with precision and speed. She coiled around the shadowy figure, wrapping herself around its arms and legs with strength, trying to weaken its power. The dark guardian screamed, uttering a series of incomprehensible words, but Zola did not relent. She knew this was the pivotal moment. The bond between her and Kofi seemed to grow stronger with every passing second, as if their strengths were being mystically shared. The ancient magic that bound them manifested once more, and Zola, with her intense light, illuminated the darkness surrounding the guardian. In a final effort, King Kofi rose with his sword, now guided by a deep wisdom he felt emanating from the magical bracelet he wore. With a precise strike, he cut through the dark guardian, who, before vanishing into a cloud of ash, let out a cry of defeat that echoed through the forest. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The guardian had been defeated, but the magical energy still lingered in the area, heavy and threatening. Kofi felt exhaustion overtake his body, but the victory was sweet. He knew the magical egg was now within his reach. With a deep breath, he approached the sacred tree where the egg lay hidden. The ancient tree, reverent and timeless, seemed to be waiting for him. At the top of a twisted branch rested the magical egg, its surface glowing with a soft, mysterious light. Kofi extended his hand, feeling an immediate connection to the egg. He knew that with it in his grasp, the spell could finally be completed. But as his fingers touched the egg, a strange sensation overtook him. The bond between him and Zola intensified even more, and somehow, Kofi knew that Azula's fate was about to change in a way he could not predict. Beside Zola, who cautiously approached, Kofi braced himself for what would come next. The journey was far from over, and the child she carried, one conceived by unknown magic, would be the key to Azula's future. The return to the kingdom was not as Kofi had imagined. Although he had defeated the Dark Guardian and secured the magical egg, the sense of victory was overshadowed by an uncertainty that seemed to hang heavily in the air. The kingdom was still, at the mercy of the hidden forces threatening its future. As Kofi and Zola approached the gates of Azula, night had already fallen. But the king's heart pounded fiercely, as if the weight of all the decisions he had made followed him closely. Zola, now restored to her human form, looked around with a mixture of fascination and confusion. There was something magical about her transformation, but at the same time she felt disconnected from her old life. What would life be like now, after everything she had endured? After being transformed into a serpent, isolated and betrayed, she still felt the lingering effects of the dark magic Adana had cast upon her. But something inside her also felt different, as if the magic had restructured more than just her body. While the kingdom continued with its daily routine, Kofi dedicated himself to finding a solution for the future of his realm, now more desperate than ever to secure the continuation of his bloodline. But what he didn't know was that upon his return, he would face a devastating revelation. King could never have imagined the betrayal that was quietly spreading through the corridors of his own castle. Upon arriving at the palace, Kofi sought out the high priest, a figure of trust throughout his life. However, something felt off. The priest was visibly agitated, as if trying to hide something. The king wasted no time in demanding an explanation for the man's behavior. It was then that, under the pressure of the monarch's demand, the priest revealed the truth. Adana, Zola's aunt, had bribed the priest to help divert the king's attention, ensuring he would never discover the dark magic used to transform Zola. The young woman, once his niece, was seen as a threat to Adana's own position in the kingdom, a threat that Adana was determined to eliminate. Over the years, she had manipulated events, concealed secrets, and removed anyone who could jeopardize her plans. The king, now furious, could hardly believe what he was hearing. The woman he had trusted, the one who had always been by his side, had orchestrated the greatest betrayal of all. Adana, in attempting to control Zola's fate, had plunged the kingdom of Azula into a web of lies and sorcery. Kofi felt a deep ache in his heart, a sense of loss that was hard to express. He knew he could not let this go unpunished. Zola, standing by the king's side, watched in silence as the truth unfolded before them. The weight of the priest's words fell upon her like an avalanche. She had suspected as much. It confirmed left her even more confused and alone. Yet something inside her shifted in that moment. She knew she couldn't continue being a victim of circumstances. She had been transformed by magic, but also by the strength of her own will. Kofi, noticing the pain in Zola's eyes, turned to her with a softer gaze, as though for the first time he truly saw her for who she was. He approached her, and, with a voice full of empathy, said, "Zola, you've been betrayed, not just by Adana, but by my own people. But now, you have the chance to rewrite your story. No longer as a victim, but as someone who holds the power to shape the future." Zola met the king's eyes, and for the first time she felt that her journey had a greater purpose. It was no longer about vengeance or pain. It was about redemption, about breaking the chains of the past and starting anew. She knew that the magical pregnancy she carried also played an important role in the unfolding story. Meanwhile, the people of Azula learned of Idana and the High Priest's betrayal. The kingdom was in shock. Determined to restore order and trust among his subjects, the king addressed the people. He revealed the conspiracy, explaining how Idana had manipulated magic and harmed the future of the kingdom. By doing so, he ensured both would face punishment. The high priest was exiled, and Idana was brought before the king to answer for her crimes. Before the royal court, Idana tried to justify herself, claiming her actions were motivated by the desire to protect the kingdom and her own position. But no one was fooled. The truth was clear. Her actions had been driven by greed and fear, not by the protection of Azula. In the end, Zola became a symbol of resistance. She was no longer just the orphan who hid in the shadows of the kingdom. She was the woman who had endured the worst forms of betrayal and overcome adversity to restore her humanity. By Kofi's side, she was recognized as a heroine woman who had defied magic itself to reverse a curse. Now, with the truth revealed and justice restored, King Kofi and Zola began to see their intertwined destiny in a new light. Together, they were ready to face the challenges that the kingdom of Azula had in store for them. The future of the kingdom was in their hands, and this time, no spell, betrayal, or magic could stop what was to come. The kingdom of Azula had never witnessed a time so full of both turmoil and rebirth. After the revelation of Idana's betrayal and Zola's restoration to her human form, the castle seemed to pulse with a new kind of energy, an energy that came from within. The truth had finally been exposed. The shadows that threatened the kingdom's future were beginning to dissipate, and for the first time, peace seemed within reach for everyone. However, there was one last trial Kofi and Zola would have to face. The birth of the heir. Zola, now deeply connected to Kofi, carried a miracle within her. A pregnancy that, though the result of ancient magic, was just as real and full of life. The promise of the spell Kofi had cast was unfolding before their eyes, and what everyone had been eagerly anticipating was the birth of the child who would ensure the continuation of the king's bloodline. The weight of such high expectations was heavy, but Zola found strength in what she represented. The burden of being the key to the kingdom's future now seemed less like a curse and more like a divine mission. The days leading up to the birth were filled with preparations and anticipation. The streets of Azula were adorned with colorful ribbons, and the markets were busy with final arrangements for the grand event. The people who had been touched by the stories of Zola's bravery were now eagerly awaiting the birth of the heir, the child who would ensure the kingdom's future was safe and prosperous. Kofi, though concerned about the approaching moment, knew that, regardless of what happened, Zola would be his partner and companion in shaping this new era. For Azula, the day of the birth arrived with the force of a storm. The sky was covered by thick clouds, but the air was charged with a palpable energy, as if the whole kingdom knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. The wisest women of the village, those who understood the secrets of life and magic, were summoned to the palace to assist with the birth. Surrounded by magic and light, Zola felt a calmness that contrasted with the tension taking over the rest of the kingdom. She knew that within her, she wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying the future of Azula. Hours passed, and finally, the sound that everyone had been waiting for, an infant's cry, echoed through the castle halls. Kofi stood by Zola's side, holding her hand tightly, feeling as though, at once, the weight of destiny rested on his shoulders, while the lightness of fulfillment surrounded him. The heir had been born, and what everyone had waited for with eager hearts had finally come true. A healthy, strong boy, with eyes shining with the promise of a brilliant future. The celebrants, waiting anxiously outside, erupted into applause and joyful cheers. Azula had, at last, But more than that, the birth of this child symbolized a new era for the kingdom, an era that would be guided by courage, wisdom, and perhaps the most important legacy, redemption. The king, holding his child for the first time, felt an indescribable wave of emotion. The concerns that had consumed him for so long seemed to vanish. The spell had worked, yes, but what he now saw wasn't just the heir to his bloodline. He saw the future of Azula, a future that felt more secure than ever. And as he looked at Zola, his partner, he knew that the true strength behind that child was not just magic, but the love and wisdom she had shared with him. Life in the kingdom flourished after the heir's birth. Azula, which had long been a stage for intrigue and fear, was now united in celebrating life and the promise of a new era. King Kofi and Zola, who had faced so many hardships, now enjoyed the peace they so richly deserved. Together, with their son, they were the true embodiment of Azula's strength, a kingdom restored through courage, magic, and, above all, unity. Zola, now recognized not only as the mother of the heir, but as a heroine and a woman of wisdom, walked alongside the king, leading a kingdom that grew stronger every day. Their alliance, forged in the fires of adversity and sacrifice, was now solidified in mutual trust and respect. Not just as rulers, but as partners in a future that without a doubt would be bright. Azula flourished, and with it, the spirit of Zola and Kofi. The heir grew, surrounded by teachings that reflected the best qualities of each of his parents, the wisdom of Zola and the courage of Kofi. Azula's future was, at last, assured.